If you were to walk into a room and see that on the board, would you start to sweat a little bit, panic, your heart rate start to go up and your mouth get dry? Chances are you have some pretty debilitating text anxiety. And now, if that was a surprise, I think that would panic anybody. But I've seen a lot of students over the years just crumble on the test. They do well on other things. They understand the material. They put in the time and the effort that it takes to learn. But learning just isn't fun because when it comes down to it, they can't show what they know on the test. And that's really heartbreaking for me. I didn't really suffer from test anxiety myself, and so I have a hard time sort of identifying with them and saying, hey, here's something that works. But finally a light kind of went on. I just read this book, Atlas of the Heart by Brene Brown, and I found some ideas really, really useful that I want to share with you. So I'm not going to try to solve test anxiety, but I want you to understand it better, understand your emotions, and kind of where they can be helpful and where they become harmful. One thing I want you to understand is that test anxiety is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it could be a really good thing. It kind of gets you amped up, ready for a test, gets your brain ready to perform well. And that's the goal, right? Is that your test performance will reflect your understanding. All the good test-taking tips in the world don't do any good if you just have this horrible stage fright or test anxiety that moves beyond anxiety into fear or dread. And that's what I want to outline, is some of the emotions that come with studying and testing. Let's dissect some of the emotions that go with both studying and test taking. And really it's important to parse them out. I think that's what I found revealing about this. And I was getting into, this is where we don't want to get. This is the really unhelpful part. And I'll explain the emotions, then we'll talk a little bit about what that does to you physiologically. In the next video, we'll talk about some potential solutions. Well, let's start with stress. Stress, we all know it. We all experience it. People have been experiencing it for a long, long time. We feel stress when a situation feels like more than we can handle, when it's unpredictable, it's out of our control, out of our hands, we don't know what's going to come next. So yeah, that would describe a test, right? You come into a test and you don't know what's going to be on there. You can't control it. You don't control the questions the teacher does. So there's always going to be some stress. But if you feel like I got it in the bag, I know this stuff, then it's not going to debilitate you as much. If you haven't studied, you haven't prepared, then it's going to be more of a problem. So quite a bit of this is about your own self-confidence, your sense of self-worth, and maybe your past experiences as well. So it's a complex emotion that has a lot to do with all of your life experiences and how that relates to what is currently happening. But I think we need to also view stress as not an entirely bad thing, because we never grow unless we're pushed beyond our current capabilities. In other words, if you're not feeling a little bit stressed while you're studying, you're not growing. You can't learn anything new unless you feel a little bit overwhelmed. But that's the key, a little bit, not a lot. And that really takes us right into feeling overwhelmed. When that stress becomes too great, we just feel like we cannot handle it, that's when it's time to take a break. So if you're studying, yeah, take a break. Do something else for an hour. Come back to it. If you're taking a test, that's a little bit different, right? So you're feeling completely overwhelmed. I guess my advice there would be skip it. Skip that question, go on to the next one if something is overwhelming you. Otherwise, the emotions take over and your brain can't do the work that it needs to. Now, anxiety is feeling tense or worried about something. And there's a physical response, right? When you have anxiety, you feel a little bit of tightness in your chest, maybe a little bit of dry mouth or something along that line. Pit in your stomach, you know those sort of feelings. That's anxiety. Now, anxiety can go a few places. It can lead us to worry, these sort of negative thoughts about what might happen. Not a particularly productive emotion, especially if you're imagining the worst case scenario. Doesn't do you any good, not while you're studying, not on a test. Anxiety can also lead us into avoidance, right? We don't like the feeling of anxiety, and so avoidance means that we just skip it. We procrastinate. I mean, that's really at the heart of procrastination, isn't it? And we're all guilty of that. So again, kind of back to studying, don't let anxiety cripple you. Look at it as a challenge. Remember, stress helps you grow. One interesting insight I got from Brene Brown on anxiety was that it feels really similar to excitement, right? When you feel really excited about something, some new event coming up that you're looking forward to, those feelings are really similar to anxiety. The difference is, do I expect the outcome to be good or bad? And so with anxiety, we're expecting the outcome to be bad. And again, kind of frame of mind thinking here, which is we need to be able to go through some discomfort and stress in order to grow. And that's the whole goal of learning. So expect that, accept it, and just kind of sit with it. Now, the last two are places we really don't want to go with test taking, and I don't think these would really apply to studying, but certainly test taking. And this is what I actually this was the light bulb moment for me. When I read about how Brene Brown described these, I realized that's what my students have. They call it test anxiety, but really they have test fear or test dread. So fear is an emotion in response to an immediate threat, right? It's that feeling that something really bad is going to happen. It's fleeting though. This would happen if you're in a near car crash, or you hear something rustling in the bushes and you're not sure what it might be, but then that feeling goes away because you figure out it was just a bird in the bushes, or I'm okay from the car. We didn't get in a crash. So fear is really typically pretty brief. I think the important thing to understand there is it will pass. Students will describe test anxiety as really fear. The test hits the table and suddenly I panic. Everything just leaves my mind. That's fear. And most emotions that are that intense last about a minute and a half, and then they subside. So one strategy there is just wait it out. That feeling will subside, right? You can, if you want to, look at the test and say, you're not a bear. This is not something I need to fear. That's just kind of a misplaced emotion, but an understandable response. Dread is similar. It's when we are not facing a threat, but we're really pretty sure that this is going to turn out badly, right? I'm pretty sure that this test is going to be a D or an F. Maybe that's because you didn't study, or maybe it's because, unfortunately, that's just your experience. I'm not a good test taker. I just do bad on tests. I just have test anxiety. And so you kind of convince yourself, right or wrong, that this is going to turn out badly. And unfortunately, that just makes everything worse. If you're sure it's going to turn out badly, then your actions are going to essentially make that happen. It's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what does Brene Brown advise on these things? So her main recommendation basically is to be vulnerable about these things, to share with somebody you trust about what you're feeling, and to recognize that feelings aren't bad, right? These are not weaknesses, they're just feelings. They're your brain's response to a situation. They're there for a reason. Some of that's your past experience, some of it is just humanity, right? It is because you are a human being and we all have similar emotions in response to stressful life circumstances. It's our body and brain's way of adapting and getting us through hard times. And so look at it that way. And we'll just kind of move on and sort of unpack some of these and think about them a little bit so you can understand why you might respond so strongly to uncertainty and risk and exposure. I want to borrow a little bit from a school of thought known as cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, I'm a biologist, not a psychologist, so I'm not going to get too deep into this one and get way out of my depth. But here's what I understand about it, is that thoughts, emotions, and behaviors or actions are not independent of one another. That emotions, they happen in your brain, not your heart. they're basically these well-worn neural pathways of responding. And we all have similar emotions, usually triggered by similar experiences, like fear and dread. But our thoughts can influence our emotions, and our emotions can influence our behaviors, and our thoughts can influence our behaviors. And that each of these things are interrelated. And so if emotions are kind of the problem here, they're getting in the way of your performance on a test, then by controlling our actions or behaviors and our thoughts, then we can start to maybe gain some control over emotions. Now, we're complex beings, right? We're not so simple as a triangle. You know, you're not a triangle, and I don't presume to think that you are, but this idea that emotions aren't just this isolated part of you is really kind of powerful, that we can start to control it by controlling thoughts and actions. And we'll get more into that here in a moment. Now, I think of emotions as something that happens in the heart, right? Well, they're really in the brain, but there's a reason that we feel like they happen in the heart. And so let me dissect sort of the emotional physiology, why emotions that happen in the brain affect your body, especially your heart. So here's essentially the flow chart of what happens. First, we perceive something, right? So that's supposed to be an eye. Sorry about the artwork there. With your eyes, ears, whatever, you perceive something, and that signal goes to your brain. All right, so perception, that triggers a thought. Remember that whole thought, emotion, behavior triangle. So now we have a thought about it. That then creates an emotional response. So also in your brain, it's kind of comparing that particular thought to your past experiences, the way you're wired, just you as a person. Then your brain sends signals out to your body. These can be hormones, nerve signals, or both, and some of those will then hit your heart, speeding it up, slowing it down, making it beat stronger, things like that. So those are the physiological responses that I was talking about, the physiology of these emotions. It can also hit places like your pancreas to release insulin, or your adrenal glands to release cortisol, the stress hormone, which releases blood sugar. So there's stuff that happens in our body as a result of what happens in our brain. And these are meant to be adaptive responses. They're supposed to help us, right? One of the reasons that blood sugar goes up when you're stressed is because you need more energy. Stress is this perception that something bad is about to happen or might happen, right? It's not raining very much. I'm stressed about my crops not coming in. So increased blood sugar, now you have more energy to go out and do the work that you might need to in order to respond to that threat. Now, this can even help you in terms of thinking. More blood sugar means better thought process. Your brain runs on blood sugar, so you have to have it. Now, these emotional responses can kind of fall into a couple different camps. Stress or anxiety, back to test anxiety, or fear, panic, or feeling overwhelmed. This is kind of where we want to be. This is what we want to avoid. These are not helpful at all. But this is really what a lot of students describe to me. I mean, their physiological responses they are describing fall into this camp rather than this one. And so let me talk a little bit about the physiology of each of them. So stress and anxiety are a response to longer term sorts of stressors. Things like lack of food, or just knowing you have a lot of work ahead of you. You got to plow the field, or maybe you need to prepare Thanksgiving dinner. The whole family's coming over and it's all on you. These are all stressful and anxiety producing situations. What your body does as a result, again, comes from the brain, and this will also trigger the adrenal glands here on top of your kidneys, and they will produce the hormone cortisol. Probably heard of this, stress hormone, What it does is raise blood glucose levels, increase fatty acids floating around in your body. And both of these basically give you the energy you need to sort of manage that stress long term, to go out and plow the field, to have the energy to stay up and keep working and make Thanksgiving dinner, that sort of thing. And so you can see where this would be a good thing. You have a lot of studying to do. You have a long test to take. This could be actually somewhat helpful. The other part, and this goes back to the nervous system, is you have kind of two subconscious parts of your nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. And the sympathetic, so the sympathetic nervous system is kind of that fight or flight sort of system. It's going to come in here as well, but a little toned down with stress and anxiety. So some of what comes with the sympathetic nervous system is things like your heart rate increasing, blood pressure going up a little bit. And that long-term stress can elevate people's blood pressure. Not a great thing long-term. It also tends to, in your stomach, sort of decrease the energy you're putting into digesting. So you get kind of the butterflies or knots in your stomach. That's another one from the sympathetic nervous system that we can thank for that. All stress responses in response to these sort of things. Some of them can be helpful depending on the situation. Well, the other type of emotional response that you could have is this one. Fear, panic, feeling really overwhelmed. Really probably more the fear and the panic is what we're talking about here. That is going to create a sympathetic response. And it's going to hit another part of the adrenal glands, and that is going to release the hormone epinephrine. Epinephrine, or adrenaline, then is released here, courses all over your body, and causes a variety of other responses, along with the sympathetic nervous system. So the heart is going to start increasing its speed, but also how hard it pumps. So these are things that happen in response to an immediate threat, right? You hear something in the bushes and you think maybe it's a bear or a mad dog or something like that. You have a close call in the car, you hear gunfire, your kid falls off a ladder. All these things would be panic or fear inducing. You need a short-term response. And so similar sort of responses make sense that your heart would beat faster. You can feel it up here in your throat after that close call in a car, and they're getting you ready for action, right? This is the fight or flight response, and in full-blown glory. Great thing if you need to run for your life because there's a bear behind you, actually in the bushes, and you gotta flee or fight or both in order to save your life. Can you see how this is not real helpful on a test, though? That's not the right emotion for that particular task. It is not helpful. So what are some of the things that you experience here? So again, besides heartbeat, some of the other effects that it has on your body would be that your pupils dilate, that your lung bronchioles expand to make it easier to breathe. You can feel that change when you're breathing after a close call with something. When the sympathetic response gets pretty strong, your mouth gets dry, you get really sweaty, things like that. Probably the most important change here, having to do with a test, is in the brain. And so this is really more of a matter of psychology than anything else. The part of your brain in the front, right here, that's the thinking, rational brain. That's what you need to use on a test. It's the part that recalls information and puts ideas together, makes logical trains of thought. All that good stuff that you want to be able to do on a test. But if you're in panic mode, right, fight or flight, you don't need rational decisions. You need quick decision making. And so that part of your brain is temporarily shut off or sort of diminished in favor of this more basic part of the brain, the basic instincts and sort of reactions and reflexes that you might have. That is not at all helpful on a test, but that's why when you get into this mode that you just can't remember anything. It's because your irrational brain is shut down. And what we need to do is get out of this and back up into just being stressed and anxious. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with being stressed and anxious. Like I said, it can actually be helpful. So the take-home message, I think, from this video, test anxiety, at least to a certain extent, can be good. Test panic, that's what we want to avoid. In the next video, I talk about some potential solutions for battling test panic.